This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Stay tuned to save 10% or more on your purchase and learn more about building your website. A few weeks ago, I published a video chronicling the evolution of 2D Metroid. I looked at how the games have progressed and regressed over time. I did this in anticipation of Metroid Dread, the first original 2D Metroid game in just under 20 years, the self-professed Metroid 5. Through playing all of these games, I gained a much better understanding of the series' strengths and weaknesses. I like to think I did a pretty good job outlining how the series has evolved, and set a pretty reasonable standard going into Dread. My questions were simple. Would Dread be a worthy follow-up to Fusion? Would it find ways to incorporate the strengths of the series whilst introducing facets of its own so as not to appear stagnant? Would this feel like Metroid 5, or would it simply be a disguise? After 10 plus playthroughs and a lot of reflection, not only do I think it met those standards, it exceeded them in ways I couldn't have expected. While it's not a perfect game, or even the perfect Metroid game, it's safe to say that this rests at the peak of what this franchise can offer and is an impressive reminder of why I fell in love with it to begin with. Welcome back, Samus.
Entering the atmosphere in T-10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
We find Samus on the ground, unconscious. The mission was to infiltrate planet ZDR and investigate for signs of the X parasite. It didn't go according to plan. Samus was attacked by a mysterious Chozo and stripped of her powers by unknown means. She's stuck in the deepest depths of the planet and must find a way to make it back to her ship. As Adam eloquently puts it, survive by any means necessary. It's an effective twist on the traditional format. There's no going back to your ship for respite, and there are 7 Emmy crawling around ready to kill you when you enter their hunting grounds. The imposing Chozo from the beginning is nowhere to be found. Why did he attack you? Why are you still alive? Where is he? And what is he planning? There's a lot of uncertainty and tension this premise brings with it, accompanying you as you search for a way out. ZDR is a compelling mixture of various environmental moods across the series. You get your more traditional ecologies, the smoldering rock and magma of Cataris, the burgeoning overgrowth of Gavaran, and the underwater depths of Berenia. These are all archetypes we've seen before, plenty of times, but the level of detail they're able to render gives these biomes more to work with. While it's easy to gloss over the backgrounds, there's always something there to give each new room a standout feature. Be that a series of caves in Arteria, the bodies hovering over pits of magma in Cataris, and the visually arresting outskirts of the Berenia laboratory. Dark and stormy with rippling waves is pretty much my entire aesthetic. The addition of unnatural structures, signs of past civilizations, completes the unsettling atmosphere. Every single area has signs of intelligent life, usually in the form of creepy laboratories that the Emmy have made into their stalking grounds. It's difficult to discern where the mark of life begins and ends, as you often weave in and out of these structures, built into the planet itself. Clearly, the Berenia lab was flooded a long time ago, as the coral reefs are bleeding into the building, deadly sea creatures making it their new home. There's evidence everywhere that the place has been abandoned for a very long time. It stands in stark contrast to Ferenia, a Chozo castle built on top of an underground mountain of rocks. It's just below the surface, so you can see the light filtering through the cracks, yet you're surrounded by reminders that you're still below ground. I love the red carpets and statues which adorn the halls. I love the music you get here. It has sort of a regal eeriness which amplifies the majesty of it all. Nothing in this soundtrack is anything earworm-worthy, which is a bit of a shame given the series' pedigree, but the tracks all do a great job underscoring your exploration of each area. There's a vibe here that's odd, a little bit of techno, a little bit of synth, and a lot of melodies that don't really come together in a memorable way, yet help to set the tone. The EMI areas showcase the soundtrack at its most powerful. Many of the tracks weaponize their ambiance to put the player on edge, but the EMI areas take it to the next level. Here's the track that plays when the EMI are patrolling. It's just a bunch of scattered noises, pairing well with the distant sound of the EMI crawling around, setting off its sonar device every once in a while. You never really know where an EMI is until you're close to them, at which point, they'll likely hear one of your footsteps and begin their search. The track morphs into something a little more urgent. They quicken the pace of the notes, letting the player know they're being hunted. If they spot you though, well, it just goes crazy. Clash of random noises interspersed with a single note repeating itself over and over again. It signals to you one thing: if you can't get away, you're going to die. The EMI really impressed me. I was always a big fan of the idea of making larger, more involved sequences with entities that resemble the SAX, but something about their designs weren't super intimidating. However, when I was spotted by one of them for the first time, prompting me to run for my life, that fear was pretty damn genuine. These things are fast, and the way they can contort their bodies, go through their own crawl spaces, show up out of nowhere to surprise you, then pin you to the ground and stab you in the neck with swift, precise motions, you could say they grew on me. It feels like you've entered their winding labyrinth. So not only can the player not harm or destroy these EMI until they found a way to the end of the maze, they also can't move as freely or swiftly as their pursuer. They're trapped inside the moment they're seen, forcing some on-the-fly evasive thinking. Each EMI has a different ability to make every encounter unique. One of them has the speed booster, another can freeze you on sight, another can see and fire through walls. Every EMI is different from the last, each with their own uniquely challenging arenas and abilities that make them difficult to contend with even if you know all of their tricks. When you finally track down the central unit, destroying them and stealing their ability, turning off the film grain effect, now able to traverse without worry, it's incredibly satisfying. Your defensive options prevent this game of cat and mouse from ever getting too frustrating. Early on, you're given the Phantom Cloak to turn invisible and evade the EMI's sight. You're also given the ability to counter them when caught. Both of these abilities are obviously extremely useful in evading the EMI, but they have drawbacks. You can only stay invisible for a short period of time. Moving, shooting, or jumping while invisible will make the Aeon gauge deplete faster. After it depletes, it begins draining your energy. All the while, you move at a snail's pace, meaning you can't keep it on through the whole section. You also can't use it when an EMI is chasing you, meaning there are no get-out-of-jail-free cards here. When you're inevitably caught, even now you still have a slim chance of survival if you can counter at the 2 available opportunities you're given. It's very difficult, as the window to counter is microscopic, and the counter timing changes at random. Sometimes it'll come out quick, sometimes it'll be delayed. It's rare and challenging, but even up to the moment you're killed, you always have a way out. That's ZDR's mood. A fight for survival on an abandoned planet. If that isn't Metroid to a T, I don't know what is. You know, it's interesting that the inciting incident here is a video of the X-Parasite being sent to the Federation. I wonder how they were contacted. Did they perhaps check the Federation's website? There's really no excuse to not have a website these days. Even I have one. If you're interested, I've partnered with Squarespace for this video to offer you a chance to make one. Be it for music, art, merchandise, whatever, Squarespace can accommodate your needs. I use my Squarespace website as a hub for newly released videos, updates on future videos, and more to come as I further develop its features. Link in the description if you're interested. You can make anything you want after you watch their easily digestible tutorials and sleek, intuitive building tools. Trust me, if I can make a website, you can too. There are step-by-step guides on what to do first. You can pick from dozens of potential pre-made styles, or scrap it all and start from scratch. They have hundreds of fonts to choose from. You can make things transparent, add color to the background, make image or video files your background. You can blur those images. You can add a store page if you're looking to sell music, art, or other merchandise. You can basically do anything to personalize your site for any use that you want it to have. Seriously, if you're a musician, artist, graphic designer, whatever, I guarantee you Squarespace will be helpful to you. So if you're looking to get started using Squarespace, you can begin your free trial today at squarespace.com/KingK using the code KingK to get 10% off your first purchase. That's squarespace.com/KingK using the code KingK to get 10% off your first purchase. There's really no excuse not to have a website these days, so get started now with the easiest, most accessible tool. I'll be the first to admit that I was a little worried about how Samus would feel, her movement speed, abilities, etc. As you'll recall, I don't have a high opinion of Samus Returns as a whole, so my hopes weren't exactly high. Despite how many angry comments I got, it is curious that many of Dread's gameplay strengths are an example of Mercury's Steam addressing the larger criticisms of Samus Returns. The Switch doesn't really use the touchscreen for much of anything, so we don't get any gimmicks here. You can turn into the morph ball with the press of a single button, a feature from AM2R. Samus Returns doesn't count because it's literally faster and more convenient to manually enter morph ball mode than it is to tap the touchscreen. Plus, there's a new slide move which eliminates the need to enter morph ball mode most of the time anyway. Super missiles are a direct upgrade, like they are in Fusion, meaning there's no awkward missile switching. The grapple beam is activated by holding ZR and shooting, which honestly just makes more sense than randomly being context sensitive in free aim, and allows the player to naturally switch between beam and grapple modes. The melee counter isn't something you have to come to a dead stop to use. Now you're allowed to counter while moving, which makes much more of a difference than you might initially realize. Maintaining your movement is essential to Metroid, given that all of the games promote speedrunning to some extent. Relying on a move which forced you to come to a standstill was slow and clunky. While it was initially satisfying to pull off, as the game went on, whenever I saw the counter signal, I just let out an exasperated sigh. In Dread, most enemies can be countered almost as soon as you're next to them. There are some notable, annoying exceptions, but for the most part, you can run by an enemy, look for its signal, and counter-kill it without disrupting your flow. Those signals also vary in how long they take to come out, meaning with each new enemy comes a different counter timing to learn. The Aeon abilities were pretty cool to play around with, but one of their annoying drawbacks was how their energy meter functioned. Using an Aeon ability would drain your Aeon gauge, and the only way to refill it was to kill enemies. Counter kills would reward more Aeon, and there were occasionally refill spots to use if you were running low. Since it was used a lot for puzzle solving, there were many times where I'd be trying to solve a hard puzzle or something and run out of Aeon, forcing me out of the room to go look for a recharge. In Dread, the gauge has been transformed into something that automatically recharges. This makes it so you can still use your abilities for puzzle solving, but only for a short window of time. It just makes more sense. The camera is zoomed out much further, and the environment design allows for areas with more space. It's been widened enough to allow for the speed booster, something Samus Returns had to omit due to its much more claustrophobic design. I mean, AM2R tells me it wouldn't have been impossible to meaningfully incorporate the speed booster into SR388 with a few tweaks, just as it was introduced to Zebes and Zero Mission. Changes like this make exploring Dread as exciting as AM2R, Zero Mission, Super Metroid, or even Fusion. It simply feels like there weren't compromises that had to be made, And sure, maybe a lot of that comes down to Dread being developed for the Switch rather than the 3DS, and it not being a remake of Metroid 2, yet I do believe many of these problems were deliberate choices that could have been avoided, given that AM2R exists. The fact that they were all addressed in Dread gives me a ton of respect for the devs at Mercury Steam. Though recent news about them not crediting their staff makes me want to take that statement back. And a lot of validation for the deserved flack I gave it in my Metroid Evolution video. A game which, by the way, I don't even think is bad. Through these changes and additions of its own, Dread positions itself as much more of an action game than its predecessors. The boss fights are longer and often more intense, with more emphasis placed on learning tells and dodging fast attacks. Upgrades like the phase shift allow for these more frenetic fights, since you have an ability that lets you quickly dash around the battlefield. Metroid has always been an action game, of course, but you could say that Dread hones in on it, making longer and harder boss fights as a consequence of that focus. What I find really impressive, though, is that the boss design stays true to the best games in the series. Fast-paced fights where you get to lay on the firepower while dodging attacks. I especially enjoy the boss dynamics once you unlock the storm missiles, since you have to balance the act of locking onto the enemy with dodging their attacks. It's a satisfying push and pull with every encounter. Perhaps they reuse a few mini-bosses more times than I'd like, but at least they almost all introduce a new mechanic. Whether it be the spear parasites gaining shields you can counter to destroy, or having that shield counter need an additional gravel beam to yank off, or throwing in 2 of them at once, or giving you just enough room to speed boost and shine spark for massive damage. I'm a pretty big fan of just how many times they've given you the ability to shine spark into bosses. It's super rewarding. Probably the most memorable instance is this experiment fight where you can completely skip the second phase if you store a shine spark when the fans are pushing you. You even get a different dynamic when you unlock abilities like the screw attack, where you can often just jump into these repeated mini-bosses and kill them in no time flat. You can one-hit the central units when their brain is exposed. They aren't just used to open new doorways, they also serve as upgrades to your combat ability, which has always been true of Metroid, sure, but I think Dread really doubles down on making every ability stand out. I do think it's kind of a shame that there aren't that many new abilities, but at least they play around with your expectations. Usually, the Morph Ball is one of the first things you get, but here you have to get quite a ways in before you unlock it. It was probably the most satisfying Morph Ball acquired moment in the series, given just how many places you're barred from accessing without it up to that point. The cross bombs are a neat upgrade to the Morph Ball bomb, and they're able to craft some interesting puzzles around the idea of them pushing you far distances. The speed booster, oh my lord. I didn't think they could make my favorite ability even better, but they have. There are some quality of life changes, like how you're given several seconds to choose your direction, removing pretty much all the frustration you'd get awkwardly fumbling around in Fusion and Zero Mission. Morph Ball Shine Sparking no longer throws you up in the air, so you can just Shine Spark in any direction. And the big one, you can now maintain your speed boost after a jump, through wall jumps, and through slides. I didn't even know you could do this on my first couple playthroughs, since it's never strictly required. It's really hard, but you can finagle your way through them by traditional means. It felt like unlocking a sixth sense when I saw how it's been expanded. Not only does this make the Shine Spark puzzle solving more fun and less frustrating, it also makes for a more fluid speedrunning tool with a lot of interesting potential. Personally, I was hoping for just a little bit more. I still really don't like that we have to keep ending these games with the gravity suit. I really like Samus's suit design in this game. It has an interesting flavor, but to just see the purple stacked on top of it as per usual is kinda disappointing. And purple's my favorite color. I really love how the Prime games handle their suit upgrades, and wish a little bit of that bled into Dread beyond the last few moments of gameplay. However, I do feel like these upgrades make for an incredibly satisfying toolkit for the endgame, and the final boss is perhaps my favorite in the series. You can use your beam, storm missiles, you can counter him at various points, you have to use your space jump and phase shift to avoid certain attacks, you get to slide under him, there's enough room to shine spark, and one of his later attacks can be destroyed with the power bomb. It really feels like you're throwing out your entire arsenal. It's a challenging fight and a fitting final test for this mechanically heightened Metroid. One of my concerns going into Dread was how it would ultimately handle your progression. The more I think about and reflect on the franchise, there are only really a few games that ever let you loose into the world and had you figure things out on your own. Metroid 1 and Super Metroid. Every other game, to a greater or lesser extent, spelled out the way forward. I really enjoyed floundering around Zebes and Super Metroid, lost and alone. But I know not everyone loves that, so it's really no surprise that Dread guides you with its unseen hand. Thankfully, there's nothing here like Zero Mission or Fusion. No one is expressly telling you where to go next. Adam mentions maybe like 1 or 2 times where you have to go, but most of your intended path is for you to figure out. I appreciate that. However, what got on my nerves a bit was just how much was robbed from my own critical thought. How many times I'd get an ability, it would show me how to use it to escape the room I was in, classic Metroid, only for me to escape the room and conveniently be right next to something I can break or unlock with this new ability, which just so happens to be the way to the next ability, and so on. All I really wanted was just 1 or 2 moments where I really had to think about the world and where I was going, but that just never happened until I was looking for secrets. Maybe I've just played enough Metroid to know the tells, since I've heard from a few friends that they managed to get themselves lost at a few points, but I just couldn't help that small pang of annoyance whenever I was spit out of a power-up room and into a teleportal. It's even more frustrating when the game gives you literally no other option than to take its path. So you take the red teleportal after getting the morph ball, which takes you back to Arteria. You do this because you can't go fight Kraid without the Varia suit, which you keep a mental note of. Conveniently, there's a morph ball shaft in the left room, the only way forward. You could theoretically go down, but why would you? This is a new path with a tantalizing power-up. This takes you to the Varia suit, which you unlock after an admittedly cool set piece where the lava explodes around you, destroying the area. After this, though, you're spit back out into the red teleportal and are forced through it. There's some debris blocking your morph ball path now for some reason. Of course, the reason is because they want you to immediately go back and fight Kraid. But I suppose my question is, what was even the point of doing this to begin with then? What if you wanted to get some power-ups before going back through the teleportal? What if you wanted to hunt around for new paths or something? I understand why the game sometimes blocks off pathways. When the planet freezes over, you need to fix it by killing a boss, so of course they don't just allow you to go wherever you want. I get that. It's actually pretty reminiscent of things Fusion would do that I really liked. But in this case, there's absolutely no reason for them to do this other than to make doubly sure that the player goes back to Kraid. Like they have such little faith in the player to make the connection between Kraid and the Varia suit. Even though it isn't nearly as obnoxious as Zero Mission literally spelling out your next upgrade, it was still something that bothered me. Until I discovered, by accident, on my first playthrough, a sequence break to get the gravity suit early. So I went through the green teleportal, poked around and found a speed booster puzzle. I solved it because any excuse to use the speed booster makes me happy, and I noticed a little hole in the wall at the end. So I went through it. I started wandering around pretty confused. Was this the correct path forward? Certainly not. A speed booster puzzle this intense would never be on the main path, right? Why am I skipping over this entire left section of Berenia? When I got the gravity suit and left, that's when I realized I just skipped the left section of Berenia. They clearly wanted me to go there, but I did a sequence break. After I beat the game, I immediately went back for a second playthrough. What else am I missing here? There has to be more, right? That can't be the only one. Thus started my journey of uncovering sequence breaks. On my own, since none of them were on YouTube yet. What I discovered was essentially a treasure trove of things the game lets you do. I discovered that you can get super missiles early by doing some cool speed booster shenanigans in a cold room. I discovered that you can get the screw attack while the planet is still frozen by infinite bomb jumping or shine sparking into this shaft. The fact that I was able to discover all of these on my own was impressive enough, but when I went to YouTube to look for more, I found so much. Apparently, I didn't even get the gravity suit as early as you could obtain it. Since you can shine spark underwater, you can get the gravity suit before the space jump or storm missiles. You can do the same shine spark trick backwards in this area to get the cross bombs early. You can get the space jump without the storm missiles, you can get the scan pulse by finding the orange teleportal, and by far the best damn thing in the game, you can get the grapple beam before Kraid, which opens up a secret path to unlock the morph ball bombs. I had always wondered what this little bomb tube was in Kraid's lair. It served no purpose, I just couldn't figure it out. Turns out, it was there to signal to the player that you can get morph ball bombs before fighting Kraid, and can use them to shoot out of this tube and instantly kill him in his second phase. I felt like a kid in a candy store uncovering all these sequence breaks. It was pure Metroid bliss. As much as I was annoyed by the game holding my hand so much, it was difficult to dwell on that when it does exactly what I wanted it to do and gives you its express permission to break it in half. Not only that, it designed so many of these sequence breaks intentionally, to an extent that I don't even think Super can top, at least for intentional tricks and skips. Even then, there have been a cavalcade of clearly unintended skips to get things like the screw attack before the gravity suit, skip an entire boss, and even phase through the floor. Dread even being comparable to Super Metroid without an infinite wall jump is pretty damn incredible. Playing the game to sequence break leads to so many interesting alternate pathways. Getting the grapple beam before Kraid lets you leave this room instead of being trapped here and forced to go through the purple teleportal. Early super missiles increase your damage output on the bosses and mini-bosses you'll encounter. Getting the gravity suit and screw attack early means that you can go back and kill this beetle boss with the screw attack. One of the first things the screw attack tells you is that it can even hurt electrified enemies, which is a subtle hint that you can cheese this boss entirely when you get it early. You're normally supposed to come to this area and leave for the gravity suit, but if you come here after the gravity suit, you're able to quickly bypass the EMI rooms that are supposed to be first traversed without the suit. You can completely trivialize the EMI if you sequence break. And you can tell they intentionally built it this way, because when you sequence break like this, instead of having to leave Ferenia and kinda awkwardly come back, with this route, you can grab the space jump, storm missiles, and wave beam and head straight to the surface for the end of the game. It can even improve the endgame item hunt for 100%, which is unfortunately not perfect. Since the power bomb is so closely related to the story, there's really no way to get it before the end of the game, which inevitably means you have to go back to all these places that require the power bomb and get upgrades you missed. I don't think it's as obnoxious as Zero Mission or Fusion, since all of the teleportals connect at the end, making world traversal much faster, but it's still a little long for my liking. I get why picking up power bomb ammo early doesn't actually give you the power bomb like it would in previous games, but it really would have solved everything. 100% would be clean, the sequence breaking would be the best in any Metroid game, and I would be fully satisfied. Alas, that is not the case, but at least sequence breaking allows you to pick up a lot of the secrets along the way much more naturally than the main path. Let me tell you, if Dread didn't have sequence breaking, if the developers didn't put so many of them in the game, I think my opinion of it would be a lot lower than it currently is. I'm glad they made a conscious effort to reward veteran players in that way without making a first-time playthrough too unwelcoming for Metroid newcomers. I mean, this is half the reason I love Super Metroid, and it's half the reason I love Dread. I've saved this talking point until the end because it's the one where I'll be raising a few more prominent criticisms. Just try to keep in mind that I adore this game, okay? It's good to criticize the things you love. Embrace it. This story is the finale of a saga, one that I wasn't really sure even existed until they announced that it did. I guess I just assumed that Metroid would continue down its narrative track and change things up as it went along, but no. We may be getting more Metroid games, but this is the definitive end to the now 5-game saga surrounding the Metroids. In a lot of ways, it feels like a fitting finale. It is surreal to finally see more of the Chozo, beings that have been heavily alluded to. Learning about this radical sect of warriors is interesting, given that we only really have the perspective of them aiding Samus as a more reserved species. Ravenbeak is one of the most intimidating forces Samus has gone up against, trying to lure out her latent Metroid abilities. It's implied that he stole her powers and hid them throughout the planet, hoping that through this process she would fully awaken her Metroid DNA. Near the end of the game, there's a bit of a fake-out where you think you're talking to Adam, but it's actually Ravenbeak. He starts talking about destiny and other weird stuff before you fight the boss. It instills this perfectly ominous feeling into the player that something isn't quite right here. Helps that Adam's voice is delightfully cold and robotic, making it so much more believable that Samus would have a hard time trusting it in Fusion. What I love about this fake-out, though, is that it's difficult to discern where it even happens. Have you actually been talking talking to Adam this whole time, or was it Ravenbeak from the beginning? I find it curious that Adam says you'll lose communication and need to access a network terminal to re-establish comms. This is one of the only 2 times he calls Samus Lady, the other being the scene right before this. Over the course of your gameplay, Adam does not call Samus Lady a single time. Considering they went out of their way to have him call her Lady twice in the intro and never again, it leads me to believe that Ravenbeak was talking to Samus the whole time. And when you view the story this way, it starts to make a lot more sense. Like, why did you lose your powers? Adam basically tells you, I don't know, amnesia, I guess? Which initially is a super lame explanation, but when you consider that it's Ravenbeak coming up with a random excuse because he's the one who stole your powers and hid them around ZDR in an effort to turn you into a weapon, it starts to make a little more sense. Ultimately, there's no way to definitively prove when Ravenbeak was in control here, but it's a fascinating question nonetheless, building him up as this manipulative, sinister threat for Samus to face after she blasts away the illusion. Her non-verbal communication in cutscenes is on point. She has a level of swagger and bravado fitting for a woman who has been on dozens of missions at this point and has just had enough of everyone's shit. You really get the sense that she's been hardened by all the stuff she's gone through, especially after the revelations in Fusion. So when she sees Kraid again, slowly lifting her arm cannon up to shoot him in the mouth, you really get the sense that she just doesn't give a fuck anymore. And I love that. It's actually why I'm okay with Kraid being back. In Samus Returns, Ridley coming in at the end is incredibly forced, but it also serves pretty much zero purpose outside of a nostalgic reverence. Kraid, meanwhile, is here to show you just how much Samus has grown. If you've been with the series up to this point, you've seen Kraid. You know all of his tricks, it's not impressive anymore, and Samus agrees with you. It isn't as if she's an emotionless robot either. Sure, you can make your comparisons to the Doomslayer or whatever, but there are so many moments where she shows vulnerability, weakness, anger, grief. When she lowers her arm cannon after recognizing that Quiet Robe isn't a threat. When she lingers for a while, staring at his corpse, before begrudgingly moving on. When she starts screaming in anger in her fight against Ravenbeak. At the beginning of the game, Adam comments on how the bounty for this mission is low, and he's confused as to why Samus took it in the first place. And if you understand Samus as a character even a little bit, you realize that she's on this mission because the X-Parasite poses a threat to the galaxy. Even if there was no bounty, she'd still be here. You don't need a heavy dialogue dump to understand where Samus is coming from, and I adore that Mercury's team were able to establish the beats of her character while only giving her a few words of speech. I even love how they reincorporate the X-Parasite. One of the Chozo on SR-388 was infected, so they had to quarantine him and lock the parasite in their prison. After Samus unknowingly releases them, they infect the entire planet, and suddenly the normal enemies you've been fighting have been infected by X-Parasites that you can absorb. It increases the difficulty while throwing a bone to fans in a completely unobtrusive way. Unfortunately, this is kinda where my largest criticisms come in. At some point, an X possesses Quiet Robe and turns the Emmy back on. I am genuinely confused as to the role this possessed Quiet Robe plays in the narrative. Suddenly it shows up at the end in Samus's ship, takes away her out-of-control Metroid powers, and she leaves. There's no reflection, no moment of pause, it just ends. Samus getting lifesteal was so cool. Watching her turn into a Metroid feels like the logical next step after Fusion. There's a feeling while you're escaping the planet that Samus really is a threat to the universe. How will she grapple with this newfound power? How will the universe attempt to hunt or use her, as the Federation did? All of these really interesting questions are seemingly thrown out the window when this X-Parasite flies into her. For a saga finale, this ending is far too ambiguous. Did this remove her Metroid DNA or simply suppress it? Did Quiet Robe overtake the X-Parasite to do that? Or was it the will of the X-Parasite that made it happen? And the fact that it unceremoniously ends at this point with not a hint of input from Adam or Samus makes it feel really incomplete. I'm all for leaving things up to interpretation, but this is something I'd have appreciated just a little more elaboration on. There are also some things about this faction of Chozo that kinda bother me. Quiet Robe explains to Samus a lot of the new lore they added in Samus Returns that I'm not a big fan of to begin with. How they installed weird DNA machines you can plug Metroids into to descend further into the depths. I don't care how far they want to go to try to explain this. Even if it makes sense, I just think it's stupid and kinda contrived. Yeah, having an earthquake occur every once in a while is also weird, but at least it could be explained by natural causes or the Metroid Queen. But hey, Samus Returns is the recommended way to play Metroid 2, so whatever, I can live with that. What I absolutely will not live with, though, is the implication that what Samus did on SR388 was justified. An element to Metroid 2's story that I adore is how the baby Metroid gets you to question Samus's mission. Why did the Federation send you here to wipe out an entire species? Did they really need to kill them all? I'd say the fact that she spares the last Metroid is a sign that no, in fact. Maybe what she did was, at the very least, morally questionable. In Fusion, they go on to explain that eliminating the Metroids allowed the X-Parasite to roam free without any natural predators, destroying the planet's ecosystem. In Dread, though, Quiet Robe basically says, man, it's a good thing you wiped out those Metroids because Ravenbeak really wanted to go back and weaponize them. It just robs a lot of the emotional weight from some of the things that happened to Samus, because now, well, even if she did do some questionable things, that's okay because at least Ravenbeak couldn't come and take over the universe. I do like the idea of Ravenbeak seeking out Samus after he learned of her Metroid DNA. It feels like a natural motivation to put the two at odds. But the reveal of her being genetically linked to him was just a step too much. It's completely unnecessary. What does this add to Samus's character? And how many questions must we now ask ourselves? Where and when did Ravenbeak give Samus his DNA? Why does Samus seem to have no idea who he is? Why has Ravenbeak not sought her out up to this point? Samus's character has always stood out to me because even though she was helped by the Chozo, ultimately, it was her bravery and confidence which carried her through to the end of all of her missions. She is the reason she's survived this long. I don't see any meaningful reason to have Ravenbeak spouting about her being his daughter. It feels extremely cheesy and comes out of nowhere, which is saying something because Metroid lore ain't exactly perfect. But that's the thing, isn't it? Metroid lore has always been pretty wonky, and I think the things that Dread carries with its story are more important anyway. Building out more of Samus's character, building the tension for upcoming boss fights, and incorporating fan service in a completely natural way. If it's gotta be a little cheesy and contrived to get to that point, I can live with that. Dread isn't perfect, I know that, you know that, and yet, I've played it more than 10 times, and I'm probably going to do several more playthroughs. There's something about Metroid I'm drawn to again and again and again. If this series is to continue, I think Mercury Steam have an incredibly good grasp on what makes the series appealing and are evidently very receptive to criticism. I'm not really sure where we'll be going from here, or if we'll be going, but one can only hope that Metroid Prime 4 does for Prime what Dread did for 2D Metroid.